Strike again as tensions come to a boil now with Russia.
Our own Rich Edson is live in Washington, D.C. with more on how the U.S. is taking action. Good morning, Rich.
Hey, good morning, Clayton, Abby, and Pete. And the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, is warning the administration's Thursday night strike in Syria was only a measured step in response to what the U.S. says is Syria's use of chemical weapons and Russia's support for the regime of Bashar al-Assad.
We are prepared to do more, but we hope that will not be necessary. It was time to say enough, but not only say it, it was time to act. The world is waiting for Russia to reconsider its misplaced alliance with Bashar Assad. The United States will no longer wait for Assad to use chemical weapons without any consequences. Those days are over.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says the administration will also pursue economic sanctions against Syria to, as he says, emphasize how significant we view this. The Trump administration says Russia bears moral responsibility for the chemicals weapons used because it was supposed to have ensured Syria destroyed its stockpile. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says that means Russia has been complicit or simply incompetent. Russia says Syria has no chemical weapons and that the U.S. strike is a violation of Syria's sovereignty and international law and has threatened the potential for a partnership between the new administration and Russia. Secretary Tillerson is still scheduled to travel to Russia next week, where senior State Department officials say he will explore areas where the two countries can work together if it benefits the U.S. American allies have largely applauded the administration's decision to strike Syria. Iran and Syria have joined Russia in condemnation of the U.S. Back to you.
All right, Rich,
Thanks,
that's in live for us. It'll be interesting to see if that meeting still takes place between Russia and Rex Tillerson.
Now with tensions, with a warship being moved there to be strong-arming. We'll see. Let's bring in Rob O'Neill
sorting out
this morning to talk about this. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you.
A lot going on. You thought you were going to have your weekend.
I did.
Not the case once we start bombing Syria.
Yeah, it turns out there's stuff going on in Syria all the time.
What kind of a message does this send to the rest of the world? Is Kim Jong-un waking up this morning questioning?
He's going to be quiet for a while, I think. He's been rattling his saber for quite a while because there wasn't really anything going to be done internationally by the United States. And President Trump pretty much has proved he's not the commander-in-chief he thought he was. He can pivot and strike, and he did, and he should have. And it's just sending a message to everyone, and to include Vladimir Putin, Bashar al-Assad, and Iran.
And Rob, not just our enemies. You've been on the ground with so many of our allies. Yeah. What does a decisive action like this? What does it say to our friends as well, who've been looking for America?
Well, the country that will back them is back. It's been hard to be an ally of the United States just because we've been weak overseas. NATO loves this. France loves this. Spain. Everyone's talking about it. Turkey likes it. People are happy about it. Like Russia doesn't have a lot of allies, and they bully people. They've pretty much got Iran, Syria, and that's kind of it. Maybe, but they bully people. Now that we came back and we're standing up to them, it's a really good sign for our allies, for NATO, for everyone. Poland,
what a change from what we've seen over the past 8 years, just in terms of leadership style. I can't help but think about our military when something like this happens, because they're the ones on the front lines. They're going to be a part of whatever happens from here. What impact do you think this has on our brave men and women who will likely go out to try to handle the situation?
It's good for them because now there's a purpose. They definitely have backing. Not that each administration doesn't want to back the troops, but now they know they're going to get the funding for the training in order to fight the enemy that we may need to fight. But most important of all, they just know that we have the ability to deter. You can stop force with force. You meet it at the point of origin, you hit it hard, and people start to back away. You hit the bully in the face, and then usually the conflict kind of dies down.
But he launched airplanes immediately after our strike. So Bashar al-Assad, I don't know if what he's doing right now, because the bigger question to me is, yes, we're stopping the chemical strikes, or that's our red line there. But to those people who've been bombed and killed, and the children, they don't care whether it's gas or these barrel bombs that he's been dumping on them for years. So is it just the chemical strike? Are we going to see stronger response from this White House as the bombing continues, regardless if it's chemicals or not?
I think the people on the ground in Syria are happy that the United States is now doing something instead of just rhetoric, and we're actually doing it. We know that what needs to happen is Bashar al-Assad needs to be he doesn't need to be taken down, but he needs to be removed with the help of Russia. Russia is there. Russia likes having Syria as a puppet. They've got one of their naval ports right there. They need to get rid of Assad, which is the reason this whole civil war started. We're going to need the help with the Russians. But right now, it's like, look, we will get peace through strength, hopefully. It's not an easy problem to solve. I'm glad I don't need to make the decision.
Who goes in? I mean, that's the big question. We were talking about this yesterday. Who goes in Assad's place? Because how can you be sure that you get someone who's better, right? You could get someone as bad as Assad or worse than him.
I mean, you're not going to get necessarily someone better, because it's proven right now that there is a vacuum. There's a vacuum when you remove a leader.
Right.
And unfortunately, so many people in that part of the world have been living under dictators. That's all they know. We tried to go into Iraq and just, hey, we'll just give you freedom and you'll accept it. It doesn't work that way. I mean, Saddam Hussein was a horrible person. He had control in that weird way. It takes a lot of time, and they're going to need it. They're going to need it themselves. But they definitely need a new head of state in Syria, just because he's the reason for so much conflict.
Well, a lot of indecision around the world has led to the chaos and the vacuum, which has led to refugees around the world, and a crisis. And there have been questions about who we let into this country and who we don't. There was an interesting exchange that played on another network yesterday, where an anchor was talking to a Syrian refugee and said, "Hey, aren't you mad at President Trump because he won't let refugees in?" And the Syrian refugee turned it on the host in a very interesting way. We're going to play the clip and then get you to react to it.
I saw the news. I cried out of joy. For the very first time we see Assad held accountable, I felt grateful for President Trump. I felt grateful for the United States.
So clearly President Trump is motivated by, just as we all have compassion for these just horrible images of these babies who were killed, but at the same time, this is a man who doesn't want Syrians to come into this country with this refugee ban.
With all due respect, I didn't see each and every person who was demonstrating after the travel ban. I didn't see you 3 days ago when people were gassed to death. We don't want to become refugees. We want to stay in our country. Help us establish safe zones. Help us stay safe in our country. And if you just give me a few seconds just to tell President Trump once again, please, sir, what you did was amazing. What you did was a powerful message of hope for a lot of people inside and outside of Syria. Please don't stop on this.
And that's not coming from like a Trump supporter here in the United States. That is from a Syrian refugee.
Right there. And I've talked to friends who are actually from Mosul, and they've come here and they want people to be screened. One of my friends said, look, I carried an AK-47 my whole life in Mosul. I don't want to carry one here in Los Angeles, so let's screen him. They just try to spin it to a ban on all Syrian refugees, which is not the case at all.
But one thing he did say, though, was please don't stop. So now,
help them with what they're doing, trying to end the civil war.
Right, and so there's like pinprick strike. Will this be one strike and then it goes away, or will there be a continued broader strategy?
Because I mean, I'm sure you've heard it raised that the now what we need a plan. I mean, there's been people at the Pentagon planning the now what since 2003. They're there. They just I mean, the plan will be there. But again, it's not going to be just war. It's going to be diplomacy. It's going to be people talking about it.
But the larger point is also the hypocrisy of please refugees, more refugees, whatever we can, criticizing military strikes when we forget that a refugee is a refugee from a country where they wanted to live and wanted to be, and they want to go back to.
They want to be in, like the guy kept reiterating, I don't want to come to the United States. I want to stay in Syria. It's not safe in Syria, but they just want to rebuild the country. I love that the people on the ground are happy with what the United States did, because it's not the rhetoric, it's just the actual people who are actually affected.
Yeah.
And this is going to help in a lot of different ways. The strike was a good thing.
I mean, he's saying we just want to be home. We want to feel safe living in our home. Help us do that.
Just help us be safe here.
Yeah. Rob, good to have you here to break all this down.
Back. Well said.
Appreciate that. All right, now to some other headlines this morning, beginning with a Fox News alert and the suspect in the deadly terror attack in Sweden, praising ISIS. The Uzbekistan native reportedly posted videos of ISIS propaganda on Facebook and liked a bloody aftermath picture from the Boston Marathon bombings. 4 people were killed after police say he hijacked a beer truck and drove into a department store. Well, witnesses say he was targeting children. The suspect running from the scene but was arrested, still covered in glass. And for the first time in more than a year, the United States Supreme Court has a 9th justice.
The nomination of Neil M. Gorsuch of Colorado to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
Republicans using the nuclear option in the Senate to get a 54-45 simple majority vote to put Neil Gorsuch on the bench, following through on President Trump's promise to replace the late Antonin Scalia. The president tweeting this: congratulations to an exceptionally qualified and respected judge on his confirmation to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch will be sworn in on Monday. And before heading home to China, President Xi Jinping making a pit stop in Alaska as crews refuel the plane. He met Alaska Governor Bill Walker for some sightseeing and dinner. China is Alaska's leading trade partner. This comes just hours after successful meetings in the Florida sun with our commander-in-chief, focusing on the economy, jobs, and trade. President Trump also accepting an invitation to visit China later on this year. And finally tying the knot at Trump Hotel. Apprentice star turned director of communications for the White House, Omarosa Manigault, will walk down the aisle later today in Washington, D.C., marrying her pastor fiancé. The bride-to-be recently appeared on the show Say Yes to the Dress. She was originally going to get married in Jacksonville, Florida, but changed venues after receiving death threats. We're told the ceremony will be private. How unfortunate is that? You received death threats because of that?
It's ridiculous, but I hope she has a wonderful day.
Yeah.
All right, coming up here on the show, the mainstream media already turning the Syrian strike into a political attack. The Washington Post headline reads this: in striking Syria, Trump risks confirming the worst fears about his presidency. Bree Payton is here to react to that next.
Confirming the worst fears.
It's now fallen to Donald Trump to enforce the red line that was first enunciated by President Obama, but that he did not follow through on. Taking that action, Donald Trump has restored the credibility of American power.
After this chemical weapons attack by Assad, he has acted in a timely, decisive, and reasonable way.
Fareed, it's day 78 of the Trump presidency. What changed last night?
I think Donald Trump became president of the United States.
Well, some of the media actually showing support for the president's strike on Syria, but not everyone is behind it, of course, and giving the president the benefit of the doubt. Here to break it down for us is staff writer for The Federalist, Bree Payton. Bree, nice to see you this morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with the Washington Post, and here's a headline that read this in part: in striking Syria, Trump risks confirming the worst fears about his presidency. What did you make when you saw that?
So I think it's perfectly legitimate to question Donald Trump's decision to use force against the Assad regime. That's perfectly healthy and normal and good. However, saying that this confirms the worst fears about the Trump administration is laughably dramatic, and I think textbook definition of how not to oppose Trump.
Well, what are those fears? Is it that he is impulsive, or you know, what we heard? I mean, what exactly are the fears that they're talking about?
Right. I mean, can you name anything that Trump hasn't done that hasn't, in quotes, confirmed our worst fears about him? I mean, anytime he eats a sandwich, anytime he eats a steak dinner, anytime he does anything is confirming the worst fears about him. And as I said, I think there are a number of questions that we do need answers to. We do need to know how deposing the Assad regime is going to make America safer. We do need to know what the costs of doing these one-off airstrikes are going to be. We do need to answer the question about whether or not we should continue to employ this strategy, or if we should seek to gain congressional approval. But that's not what Aaron Blaine is doing in his column. He is just, you know, doing this media trope that's become very embarrassing at this point.
Also trying to understand Trump's motives, and that's what the media sometimes likes to do. Here's the New York Times on Trump's motive. It's impossible to ignore the degree to which the military strike pushes a slew of unflattering stories about the Trump administration. Its failed attempt to undo Obamacare, the feuding within its ranks, and above all, the probes into possible collusion between Trump's associates and the Russian government to the side of the page. Frank Bruni, New York Times column on April 7th. So this is just an attempt, Bree, to change the narrative. That's why we struck Syria.
You know, in the wake of the attacks, there was an Obama White House official that said that this really is an indictment on the Obama administration, because the Obama administration wouldn't be able to put this strike together in 48 hours. And Donald Trump did say that he would undo the fecklessness and inability to enforce the red line that Obama failed to do all throughout his presidency. So I think it does change the narrative, but I think that's clearly not his motive. There are a number of children who died in a very, you know, brutal and horrific manner last week, and I think responding to that and saying, if you sign a treaty with us, you need to keep your end of the bargain, is perfectly legitimate.
Well, there was some move from the New York Times to lay claim to Trump's heart. Here was the first headline they ran with. On Syria attack, Trump's heart came first. But then they switched it up, and they switched it to this: acting on instinct, Trump upends his own foreign policy.
Yeah, I think trying to mind read the president is ridiculous. I think it's very clear that he is trying to make sure that Assad is going to adhere to the terms of the treaty, and I think that it's a very clear strategic interest and not just whatever emotional tea leaf reading the media is trying to put into this.
All right, Bree Payton, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Coming up here on the show, new rumors of a possible shakeup in the president's inner circle. Former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski is here to react to that next.
The question is, will that strength and diversity of opinion stick around? Is Bannon there to stay? Is Reince Priebus there to stay?
I would assume so. That's up to Donald Trump. In other words, I've heard nothing but rumors and innuendos and press reports.
All right, rumors,
That's right.
Press reports.
That was Kellyanne Conway on the first 100 days last night. And here to comment on that and other things in the news today is former Donald Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Corey, thanks for joining us this morning. So is this an epic disruption, or is this a media obsessed with palace intrigue? What's your sense? You're well connected inside the White House, whether it's Reince Priebus or Steve Bannon or Jared Kushner. How are relations there?
Well, this is a real attempt to distract from the real story, which is April the giraffe has still not given birth, and the media is very concerned about this, as you know. Last week this was the topic. Last week that was the topic, and today we're worried about Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus.
I would frankly much rather watch a live webcam than talk about this. But I will say this is interesting. Does this? Obviously, we saw the reporting this week about Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, President Trump allegedly saying, "Figure it out, guys," and we're also hearing rumors that Reince Priebus. It didn't sound like a ringing endorsement though from Kellyanne Conway last night when asked whether or not Reince Priebus was in or out. She said, "Well, that's up to the president." Is he out?
Well, I don't think he's out, but what I do think is that anyone who wants to pretend to speak on behalf of the president may find themselves backtracking very quickly. And what we know is that the president is the one who makes the decisions in the White House about who's going to stay and who's going to leave. Now, that said, if you look at the success of this administration in this week that's happened, 3 bilateral discussions, a meeting with the president of China, having Neil Gorsuch confirmed as a Supreme Court justice, this administration has had a very good week, plus responding to a dictator in Syria. You know, this is a week that most of the media isn't focusing that on. What they want to do is they want to focus on what is supposed to be the palace intrigue. Is Reince Priebus in or out? He's the chief of staff today. And is that going to change? The only person who's going to know that is Donald Trump. But what I do know is the president has surrounded himself with a number of people who have different opinions on how things should be accomplished. That's a healthy environment, in my opinion. Whether it's Steve Bannon or Reince Priebus or Jared Kushner or Gary Cohn or whoever that may be, you want differences of opinion. You want people who are willing to tell the president that sometimes they think the decision process has to change. That's important for the president to make the best decision, and that's what he's done by surrounding himself with a number of different people.
Yeah, Corey, you know this. The main role for members of his team, it's not about them individually. It's not about their egos. It's not about them winning every single time. It's about making their boss, the president, look better. So is it on them to figure out how to move forward? It sounds like in these reports, President Trump said, you guys duke it out. You guys solve this.
I think that's exactly right. I think what the president has said, and you know what, candidly, staff decisions should not be brought to the president's level. That should be done at the staff level. And if there's a discrepancy between 2 individuals or 3 or 4, they need to get behind closed doors and say, what are we doing to move the president's agenda forward today? What are we doing so that we can make sure that we're fulfilling the promises that this president made on the campaign trail? And all this palace intrigue, all these discussions about staff shakeups, that should never take place in the media. I never remember when George W. Bush was the president, all the intrigue about Andy Card, who had been the chief of staff for 5 years, finally leaving, or when Barack Obama changed out Rahm Emanuel or all the other people. There was never all this media hype around it. That stuff, if there's any of those conversations done behind closed doors, move the president's agenda forward.
Corey, as you said, this is day 79. This is a big week for the Trump presidency, from the confirmation of Justice Gorsuch to airstrikes in Syria. But the media just, they can't quite wrap their arms around talking about that. Instead, they want to obsess over conspiracy theories yet again about Russia. And they're talking. Another network had an anchor who had a fairly ridiculous theory, not fairly, very ridiculous theory. Listen to, we may or may not have it yet. Do we have it? We do. We'll play it.
Wouldn't it be nice if it was just completely, totally, absolutely impossible to suspect that Vladimir Putin orchestrated what happened in Syria this week so that his friend in the White House could have a big night with missiles and all of the praise he's picked up over the last 24 hours? Wouldn't it be so nice if you couldn't, even in your wildest dreams, imagine a scenario like that. I don't know what it is. Is it a 2% chance? Is it a 50% chance? I don't know. But I don't think it's a 0% chance. And it used to be with every other president prior to Donald Trump.
That moment when even Rachel Maddow thinks you're insane.
It's amazing to me how terrible the mainstream media is. And look, here's the problem. You have another anchor who wants to be the news and not report the news. You know, what they want to do is they want to get clicks, they want to get FaceTime, they want to get people to talk about them. They just completely make up stories that are they're not based in any fact. They're not held accountable. They say whatever they want because they have their own television show with no accountability. And then people wonder why no one believes the mainstream media anymore. It's amazing because they just make up things as they go on.
So, Corey, we'll get you out of here on this, which is what happens next. We saw this airstrike. It was decisive, taking out these airplanes of the Assad regime. But what happens next? What's your sense of what kind of discussions are happening now behind closed doors in the Trump administration?
I think what you saw is what Nikki Haley said, is that the United States is prepared to continue to act if Assad continues to use chemical weapons against his own people. But I know President Trump. I know him very well. And the last thing he wants to do is have U.S. citizens or military action in a place that doesn't serve the best interests of the United States. So I think those conversations are ongoing. We're going to have to understand what continues to happen in Syria. And look, Rob talked about this just on your show earlier. Once Assad is taken out, and that will happen, who fills that vacuum? That's a very serious concern, because we know when there's a dictator in place, when he's removed, sometimes the problem gets worse. And Assad's a very bad guy, and he needs to be brought before the world court and held accountable. But what happens when he is removed from power?
That's right. It's a tension between America first and American leadership.
Yeah, that's a big question remaining. Corey Lewandowski, good to have you here this morning.
Check on
have
the
a good day.
giraffe.
Thank you.
Yeah, go check on the giraffe for us and get back.
He's all over it. Right. I do think we'll have an update on
Although
April
we don't have an update.
No, we do.
Right?
You know, Tully, one of our producers, is obsessed with this story, so I'm sure
I
if
hope
you
he's
stick
working
around,
on it. Oh,
there
look,
it is.
It's still going?
No, there's no baby, so it must still be going.
Wow.
See, I said from the beginning, I think she's pregnant.
Well, you're a connoisseur of giraffes during pregnancy.
Coming up here on the show, did members of the Obama administration mislead the public when they said back in 2014 that Assad no longer had chemical weapons? We got them all.
We struck a deal where we got 100% of the chemical weapons out.
We were able to find a solution that actually removed the chemical weapons that were known from Syria.
One of President Obama's foreign policy advisors joins us live to react to that next.
And it's the sequel Democrat.
We struck a deal where we got 100% of the chemical weapons out.
What this administration did, we used the unique capabilities of the United States to destroy those chemical weapons.
We were able to find a solution that actually removed the chemical weapons that were known from Syria in a way that the use of force would never have accomplished.
That's former Obama administration officials taking heat for claiming that the Obama administration was able to remove all the chemical weapons from Syria. So did they mislead the public?
Let's ask former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor and former State Department official David Tafori. Nice to see you this morning, David. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So this deal that was struck back in 2013, was it a good deal? Did we get all of the chemical weapons?
This was not a good deal. This was a compromise deal. I remember back then that I felt that we were making a mistake, that we should have used military force to send a much stronger message to Assad that he cannot use chemical weapons, and that, as you mentioned earlier in the show, just getting him to stop chemical weapons was not enough. We needed to get him to stop some of the other atrocities, the barrel bombing that were killing so many people. Right. You know, back in 2013, we'd only lost about 8,000, 10,000 people in Syria, which is a tragedy, but it's nowhere near the level of the tragedy we have now. We have almost 500,000 people killed. So it wasn't a great deal. It was a compromise. It was good to get Assad to give up his chemical weapons, but we see now he didn't give up all of them, and that's because there wasn't a strong monitoring regime in place. And we were also partly relying on Russia to help collect the chemical weapons and make sure that Assad was complying with the deal, and obviously he didn't.
So as someone, David, who understood this administration and their calculations, when they make these statements that the chemical weapons are gone, is that delusion? Is that deception? Is that, as you said, a failure to even be able to monitor? Why would you make a statement, they're all gone, if it's not true?
I don't think it was delusion or deception. I think that was their understanding from the information that they had. But at that time, we didn't have a strong presence in Syria, so we didn't have much capability to verify. We were relying on, you know, the UN verifiers who were in country and who were monitoring the situation, and on Russia and on Assad. We know now, and as we should have known then, that we couldn't trust Assad or Russia. I do think it did result in Assad giving up a lot of the chemical weapons, but obviously he kept some, he hid some, and he was successful in having them to use them later on, which he has now done.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Iran. I mean, that's one of the bigger questions here, too, is Iran is a huge player here, and that concern of whether or not they had chemical weapons in Syria. Couldn't you ask the same question about Iran with nuclear weapons? I mean, are they really getting rid of them, or are they rebuilding them, for all we know?
Yeah. Well, that's a relevant question. You know, I think the monitoring regime that we have in place for Iran is much stronger and much more significant. But I also have, you know, some questions about the Iran agreement. I think that also could have been stronger. And as with Syria, just getting Iran to give up its nuclear weapons ambitions wasn't enough and isn't enough, because we know that Iran does a lot to foment violence and terrorism all over the world, other than just, you know, pursuing nuclear weapons. So, you know, President Trump has said he wants to change the Iran agreement. I think this administration is serious about that, and I'm interested to see what they're going to do. I don't think we should scrap it, because it's a good thing to have Iran giving up its nuclear weapons capability, but we need to make it stronger, and we need to do more to curb the activities of Iran that foment violence and instability, especially in the Middle East.
Do you think your former boss missed an opportunity to strike in 2013 when Congress wouldn't give him the approval to do so?
I definitely do. I said that back then. I wrote about that back then. We should have used military force back then. I didn't think that we needed a congressional authorization. I think President Obama went to seek congressional authorization because he wanted to make sure everyone was on board, but I think that was a mistake.
Wow. David Tafuri, thank you for being very honest this morning. We really appreciate it. Lots of great insight there.
Your perspective this morning.
Thanks,
David.
Thank you.
All right. Neil Gorsuch officially confirmed as the next Associate Supreme Court Justice. How could he vote on cases that may affect you, like using guns outside of your home in self-defense? Famed attorney Alan Dershowitz here to discuss next.
Plus, Democrats claim President Trump is too cozy. Well, President Trump has long been under fire by critics who claim he is too cozy with Vladimir Putin. But will that change the airstrikes against Russia's ally, Syria? Some in the media seem to think so. A Slate article asked what happened to Putin's puppet. USA Today said that's the president bromance with Putin in his history. And a CNBC writer said the president's yanked the Russian card from the Democrats' hands. So is the Dems' Russia talking point now dismantled? Here to debate is Democratic strategist Richard Fowler and former Trump spokesman Aaron Elmore. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Abby.
Thank you. All right, so Richard, we'll start with you. We just played a quote from an anchor of another network saying that you can't be 100%